didn't bring himself to kill Noah because Noah didn't deserve to die. Well, that's not what it says. Noah found grace. Noah should have drowned with everyone else, but clearly Noah wasn't as completely depraved as the rest of the world. And he listened to the voice of God. He still had to obey God, still had to show his faith in God by following through with building the ark and following God's instructions, which is emphasized in chapter 6 and 7, that Noah did what God asked him. But it started with grace. And then the story, far from the idyllic, perfect, happy ending we might expect, it takes a dark turn in chapter 9. Not the way we would have written the story. We might think that Noah becomes deified himself, or he rides off into the sunset, but this final chapter in Noah's story is not so good. So in chapter 9, regarding his sons, beginning in verse 18, it says, the sons of Noah who went out from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we already noted that Shem, I don't think you could prove this one way or the other, but I think it's likely that Shem is not the oldest, but like basically every generation of the patriarchs and every story where you could deviate from the oldest and instead go with one of the younger sons and follow the story through the younger son, that's the norm in Genesis. So Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham was the father of Canaan. Now these three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. And Noah began to be a farmer. He planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. Now at this point we would probably want to stop and make some observations about alcohol and becoming drunk and the dangers there. And that all is true, but that's not the main focus of the story. The main focus of the story is Canaan. Well, who's Canaan? Ham's son, his youngest son. Who is Canaan to the original audience of Genesis? The people that live, and so it's called Canaan because those are the people that live there, the descendants of Canaan. So you understand why these stories are told at the time Moses wrote this stuff down, and the original audience being the Israelites post-exile, but probably prior to inheriting the promised land, prior to the conquest. They need to understand why things have happened the way they've happened. They need to understand why God is choosing to dispossess this people from the land and move them in instead. They need to understand why Canaan is cursed. That's the purpose of the story. So yes, Noah makes some poor choices here, but the focus is going to be on the actions of Ham and how that has ramifications throughout the generations of his descendants to the Canaanites, even to the days of Moses, who likely wrote Genesis. So just keep in mind that that is the emphasis of the story here, even though I think it's fair to criticize Noah's decisions here. But it says in verse 22 that Ham, the father of Canaan, again, second time he's emphasized that already, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both of their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So there is, like so many places before in the book of Genesis, there are questions that arise that I'm not sure have definitive answers. It seems odd to me if this is simply seeing their naked father. There has to be something more than simply seeing that. And some indications are uncovering, or saw the nakedness of his father that was uncovered in verse 21. Just briefly look at Leviticus for just a moment. And you'll see again this idea of Canaan and the actions of the Canaanites being the reason for their curse. In Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 6, the way this expression, uncover the nakedness of, it can be basically a way or a euphemism for having relations with someone. And so this is a chapter about Well, within the family. So, chapter 18 and verse 6 of Leviticus, none of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him, to uncover his nakedness. I am the Lord. And this is talking about incest. And so it's the impression you get from this expression is something more than simply seeing somebody unclothed. That doesn't seem to be the emphasis there. And again in chapter 18 of Leviticus and verse 20, moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. So it gets a little more explicit there. In this context, that's how the phrase seems to be used. And then again, chapter 20. I think this one's very clear. Chapter 20 and verse 17. If a man takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it is a wicked thing, and they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness. He shall bear his guilt. So it implies that there's something more going on. As we go back to Genesis chapter 9, there's all kinds of theories that are put forward. I don't know exactly what is being described here, but I'll just say that it appears to me that there's something more than just Noah's over there drunk and he's naked and Ham happens to see it. There's something more going on. How far this story goes, I don't know. There's some really far out there implications that Ham did things to his father in that condition. Because when Noah, in verse 24, it says, Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. That implies some action, not just beholding. But that could also imply something else. What other things could Ham have done? What did he do with his brothers? Told them. So that's another way you could interpret it as well. It could simply be that he knew what his son had done to him, and what that doing was, that action was going and drawing attention, dishonoring. So whatever exactly happened, I don't think it necessitates a darker conclusion, but that's what it seems to imply to me. But whatever you might interpret as the specific thing that happened, what's the takeaway here? How did Shem and Japheth respond? They clothed him. They responded by honoring their father. So whatever speculation exists and commentaries, whatever theories have been put forward about what actually happened, it just feels to me like it's a little worse than just, oh, there's our dad drunk and naked over there. I think he went a little further than just seeing his father like that. But what happened? We don't know. But at the end of the day, he dishonored his father. And his other brothers chose to respect and honor their father and try to cover him in this condition. So it's a very unpleasant story, is it not? But it tells us something about Ham. And so when his father woke up, he says in verse 25, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. And he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. And then Noah lived after the flood 350 years, and so all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. And that's the end of his story. Kind of not a heroic ending, but it helps the original audience understand what's going on here. And this is exactly what was said in Leviticus 18, when he talks about all the abominations that they were not supposed to commit as part of the law of Moses. It says all these things the inhabitants of Canaan do. So this became a generational problem, and this is Moses telling them, do you know why you are not to behave like the Canaanites? Do you know why they are being judged and dispossessed from their land? We can trace this all the way back to their forefather Ham. Robert?
So I was wondering why Canaan was cursed and not Ham.
Yeah, Canaan gets the emphasis because this is written during the days of Moses. Right. And because...
Could it be because in verse 1, God had already blessed Ham, and Noah knew his position was, I can't take away a blessing from God.
I think it more, just in my mind, reading through it, it more feels to me like this is Moses explaining to Israel They don't really care so much about Ham because Ham was hundreds and hundreds of years before them, but they are interested in the descendants of Canaan. And you're going to see this. Chapter 10, boring genealogies. We'll just call it what it is, right? But if you spend a little time looking through there, you find some useful information. Not the most exciting part of Genesis, but there is some useful information there. And you're going to see that the first 5 verses, the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. He goes through the descendants of Japheth, and you get verses 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's pretty much it. You get verse 6 through 19 to get a little more emphasis on the descendants of Ham. And then you get a big chunk of chapter 11 that deals with the descendants of Shem. So Japheth gets hardly any attention in his genealogy. But to be thorough, he's included. But Ham gets a lot more attention than Japheth. And Shem gets the most attention because those are the two descendants of Noah and their offspring. Those peoples are going to be the most influential in the book of Genesis. The people of God, the people of Israel, of course, Abraham is a descendant of Shem. And so the Israelites are from Shem. And then you see the descendants of Ham. Those are going to be the people that they interact with most often. And again, think in context of this initial audience. The Israelites, post-exile, pre-conquest. We're here in the wilderness. We've been rescued by God, but we're still looking for the promised land. We've been given the law from Moses. We've entered into this covenant with God. But this is the explanation of things. This is their explanation of how and why this happened and their position in the world. And when you look at, chapter 10 and verse 6. The sons of Ham were Cush. Who is Cush? Ethiopia. Yeah. In fact, I'll put this map up there. You can kind of see a general idea here of where these people ended up. So Ham is in yellow. And so his descendants end up settling a little bit here in the promised land, right there on the Sinai Peninsula and that area there. But mostly they go over into Egypt, in parts of Africa, and head further down south. Shem stays right here on the Arabian Peninsula, and then Japheth is the one that goes out towards Greece and Asia Minor. And that's where those descendants kind of settled down. So you can see that Ethiopia is Cush. Again in chapter 10, verse 6, Mizraim. Who is Mizraim? Some of your Bibles cheat and just translate it. Who are the descendants of Mizraim? Egypt. Yeah, primarily Egypt. Well, they're pretty important in the book of Exodus and Genesis, aren't they? So we get Egypt as another descendant of Ham, and then Put. Anyone know where Put or Put? Could be Put, I don't know. What country they become or what general area they become? They're more Libya, modern day Libya. I don't know if they're represented on that map very well. And then you get Canaan is the fourth son mentioned of Ham. So in the context of explaining to Israel their place in the world and their place in God's plan, they've just been set free from slavery to one of Ham's sons, and they're about to go conquer the descendants of another of Ham's sons. These are the people that, and you can see the prophecy of Noah, that they will serve you. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. May Canaan be his servant. And so you're seeing the fulfillment of some of Noah's prophetic remarks there, in that they are set free from one of Ham's sons and they go and conquer the other. So that's why you get so much attention here, and that's why I think in the context of the initial audience, Moses talking to Israel, they aren't so much concerned with Ham specifically as they are concerned with the descendants of Ham that are alive in their time, the Canaanites. So that's why I think Canaan gets the emphasis here and Canaan gets cursed. Even though it was Ham. Yeah, Ham gets cursed, but we're more interested narratively with his descendants because that's the time this book was actually written. Does that make sense? Any questions through chapter 9 and that very dissatisfying conclusion to Noah's story? And you're going to see this a couple of times in Genesis. You're going to see these stories that are pretty awful. Judah and Tamar. Why the story in the Bible? Why do we need this? Well, it helps explain things. It helps explain things in Moses' day, even though he's writing about things that came before them. And so that's why we get stories like this. Even the distasteful ones, they're helping to explain the way the world is in the days of Moses and Israel post-exile, or post-captivity, set free from Egypt. All right, so we've already kind of taken a look at chapter 10. Again, we just blow right through the descendants of Japheth without much attention, but do you see any repetition in chapter 10? Any phrases repeated that help us see what's going on and where this fits? Because chapter 10 is kind of dry, but how does it fit into the bigger narrative? And do you see any repeated phrases? Yeah, Noah's genealogy is mentioned a couple of times, beginning and end. So you get some repetition there. You get the age of Noah. But then any age that's mentioned, especially later on in chapter 11, you see the ages are going down after the flood. That's something you notice. But in chapter 10, you see all three sons mentioned here. And notice at the end of each genealogy, verse 5, what is emphasized at the end of Japheth's genealogy? Language, family, and nation. Each according to their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families and their nations. Verse 20, after the descendants of Ham. These were the sons of Ham according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, and in their nations. Verse 31, these are the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, according to their nations. So you get that phrase repeated, and that's telling us how the world became what it was. The world is divided by different nationalities, by different cultures, different customs, and most notably, languages. Well, how did that happen? You can see narratively, even though this is dry, it is pointing us towards the next prominent story, Tower of Babel. Here's the explanation. Here's why the world is divided by nation, families, and languages. And so we see the sons of Noah divided up like this. And then again, after this, we're going to come back to Shem's descendants and get a second helping of, with greater emphasis of his genealogy, because that's where we follow the main story. But we get to chapter 11, and here's the explanation of why things were divided the way they were. So in chapter 11, verse 1, it says, the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. All right, so again, they're journeying east, and in this story, they're getting farther away from God. Do you see that connection again? East is bad. East is always bad in Genesis. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and dwelt there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and make them thoroughly. They had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar, and they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they began to do. Now nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there to confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. It's easy to see how this is helpful to Israel. As Moses is leading them and they're preparing for the conquest, this is helpful for them to understand that there aren't local gods. This nation doesn't have this God, and this nation doesn't have this God, and they've got their God, and they worship this set of gods. There's one God over all the earth, and He's the one that appointed their boundaries. He's the one that put them where they are. He is the cause of it. He's not just some new God that has shown up. That's what God through Moses is trying to show them through these stories. All right, so why was this such a bad thing to build the tower? Their attitude. All right, let's explore that a little bit. What is their attitude in this moment? Tyler?
They're trying to cheat.
They're trying to cheat?
They're trying to get to heaven in a way that God didn't intend. They're trying to take a shortcut.
Yeah, they talk about building up to the heavens. Do they literally want to break through the gates of heaven, or just figuratively build something tall? It's debatable, but they are trying to go around what God had told them to do. That is for sure. What else? What else would we say about their behavior, their attitudes? Want to make a name for themselves. What does that mean? Pride. At its core, that's what pride is. Seeking attention. I want my name to be known. That's, I don't want to say all social media is for, but we've forgotten all the good things we can do with social media. All I'm interested in on social media is I want to see what people are up to, cute pictures of their kids, what's going on in their lives. But so much of social media is, let me broadcast me. I want to see more likes. I want to do things that will get attention. If this video goes viral, I could become a professional YouTuber. It's all about me. And that's one of the big problems with social media is it's too much you. John, I saw your hand up a second ago.
So in chapter 9, it talks about Nimrod, and one of his kingdoms was Babel. It says, Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on the earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. So if that is in fact his kingdom, it sounds like he was full of pride himself. And
Yeah. It's chapter 10 and verse 8. Does anyone know what the name Nimrod means? Hunter. Other definitions include rebel. This is a continuation of what we've seen. Cain kills Abel. He's avenged sevenfold. Lamech kills guys for lesser reasons. Says, I'm avenged 77-fold. You see this increase of sin. And so you're getting this guy who is a great conqueror, a mighty hunter before the Lord. But he's also a rebel. He's doing things his own way. He's doing things for himself. And that's a good observation that the beginning of his kingdom was Babel in verse 10. So that shows the origins of where this comes from. And pride, this desire to make a great name. People will talk about me. I want to be what people talk about. I want attention. I want lots of views. That's at the center of pride. So they wanted to make a name for themselves. What were some of their other concerns, their reasons for building this city that revealed their attitude? They didn't want to be scattered. Yeah. So this would have been great a month and a half ago in the middle of June, but something else we learned about pride. Pride wants attention, and pride likes security, strength in numbers. That's why you see the big pride parades. We can't all be wrong. They can't arrest all of us. We can't all get in trouble. If we join together, we're unstoppable. Kind of sound like the modern pride movement. Just a little bit. And that's the thing there is they're looking for security, but not in God. They are showing a lack of faith and trust in God, which I've suggested to you is the main lesson from all of Genesis, is that challenge to either walk by sight and trust yourself and make yourself as secure as you can, or walk by faith and trust God, even if it doesn't look as obviously prosperous as the other path. This is highlighted especially, jump across to the next column in your Bible to Genesis chapter 12. Notice the blessings given to Abram in chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 2. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. Abraham was going to have a great name. The people in Babel wanted a great name. They were going out and getting it for themselves. God was going to give it to Abraham because Abraham was going to be a man of faith. You see the contrast there. So they're looking for security, strength in numbers. They don't want to be scattered. And what did God tell them to do at the very beginning of creation and again after the flood? Spread out and fill the earth. We don't want to. They're rebelling. Phyllis. Yeah. They wanted that exaltation and they were going about it for themselves. And so that's a main point between chapter 11 and chapter 12. When you look at the blessings promised to Abraham, let God bless your name. Let God make your name great. Don't go out and try and get that for yourself. Live a life of faith, humility, and serve God rather than trying to have all the attention. The idea of pride is, I want to make my name great. I want to build something that will last, and we all need to join together and do it. That's not necessarily the way things are supposed to go. So that's what they want to do. And God, again, similar language to the creation account, let us go down and see the city. So the Lord came down as if he needed to be there and as if he wasn't aware of what was actually going on. He comes down, and what does he say? Behold, we need to stop this. Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin. Now nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. Is God actually concerned that they could become unstoppable? No. But what just happened in our story, in the narrative story? What did we just get over in the book of Genesis? Every thought and every intention of their heart was only evil continually. They're fast tracking to go right back to another flood, and God just promised he's not going to do that again. So this, and we talked about this, when he put his bow in the sky and said, I'm not making war with you anymore. I'm not flooding the earth like that again. I'm not changing the nature of this creation as a consequence of sin anymore. This is what God is doing instead. I'm going to do it a different way so that we don't end up a few generations from now right back where we were in chapter 6. I'm going to step in and do something different. Let's scatter you by language. That's at least the way this story kind of reads to me, is to avoid a repeat of the flood, where they all were of the same mind and all were wicked. It says we need to spread them out a little bit. We need to scatter them. So this explains why In verse 8, they stopped building the city and they spread out. And this explains why the world was set the way it was in the days of Moses. And now they have a better understanding of their place in the world. Any questions through Babel? Richard? Yeah, and that's very reflective of chapter 1. Let us make man in our image. A couple of theories. It could be the Godhead. That is a very predominant Christian explanation. Father, Son, Spirit. It could be God speaking with the angels and all the heavenly host. That's a very plausible explanation. You see that in Revelation. In Revelation chapter 4, there is the 24 elders, the 4 living creatures. There is thousands of angels all around his throne. So it's not like God is alone by himself in heaven. So that's a very plausible explanation. What makes the most sense to me is, yes, it is indicative of the Godhead, but not specifically about the Godhead. It's more the idea that the nature of God is, you can't just think of it singularly. God is so much more than that, that it's used as an expression to magnify the difference in God's existence from our own. But I think there's a couple of explanations there that all could work. And we're left with a little bit of mystery here. I think that's a good idea there, that it's language that is unique to God because he is unique. That's kind of the way I think about it personally. But I think any of those explanations, the Godhead or God speaking to the heavenly hosts, that's very fair. Kay? Chapter 11, verse 12. Arphaxad, he is the father of Selah. I'm not really sure. He's the first son. Let's see. He begot Arphaxad in verse 10, 2 years after the flood. So he is I believe he would be the firstborn of Shem. And I'll be the first to admit, when I get to a boring genealogy, I have to force myself to really dig in. And so there's still a lot of names here that, and a lot of this is a repeat from chapter 10, verses 21 through 30, like Peleg comes up a few generations later. If you go back to chapter 10 and verse 25, it says, to Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. So that's just when I'm going through genealogies, I'm looking for peculiarities, things that stand out from the pattern. And such was this many years old, and he begot so-and-so. And in the 50th year of his life, he begot so-and-so. And it just gets this repetition. But then you get something that's, well, there's a sentence added here. And John was really clever to point out the connection with Nimrod and Babel. Because why is that little brief description there? It's there for a reason. So look for the breaks. Kind of like in Matthew chapter 1. You notice that there's only 4 women in the genealogy of Jesus, and they all have not great stories. They all have some questionable chapters in their stories. And what's interesting is Bathsheba is not mentioned by name. She who had been the wife of Uriah, to wonder why this sticks out like a sore thumb from the rest of the formula. So when you get those oddities, just that helps make these dry sections a little more interesting, is to give you something to look for. So a name like Arphaxad, I don't really know much about him. I just kind of glaze over that. But when I get to something that is a little peculiar, that makes it a little more interesting to me and gives me something to look for in these otherwise dry sections of text. So really all of the rest of chapter 11 is just to introduce us to who? Abraham. I mean, Terah, But Abraham is the one that for the next 10 plus chapters, we get to the heart of the story with the patriarchs. Joe.
If I did my math right, it was Noah lived for 350 years after the flood. And if you count up those generations, there's 292 years that passed until the birth of Abram.
Yeah.
Which means Abraham got to live for 58 years in the presence of Noah. And whether they met or not, I just assume that maybe they did.
Yeah. And that's assuming that this is an exhaustive genealogy, which it may be, it might not be. But 300 years sounds like, feels like there should be more time than that, but I don't know. And that does beg some interesting questions too. Like before the flood, you also see that, what is it? You do the math, that Methuselah died the year the flood started, so that he wouldn't have died in the flood, he would have died just before the flood. So there are some interesting things when you do the math, and there are ways to look at these texts and find things like that make it interesting and even useful to understand. So I would love to know if Abraham, if this is an exhaustive genealogy and we take it literally at face value, I would love to know that if Noah and Abraham ever crossed paths. Be pretty interesting to see if they did know each other even briefly. Anything else in chapter 11? So we want to get to verses 27 through 32. This is our introduction to really the main focus. We get to Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation. Chapter 11. We'll look at verses 27 through 32 and finish up chapter 11. So the genealogy of Terah. And again, that means it's the beginning of a new section of this book. And this is by far the longest naturally occurring division or chapter, if you will. The genealogy of Terah, which is really about Abraham. But we talk about Terah. Terah begot Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran begot Lot. So we know that Lot is going to be a nephew to Abram. Look, I'm just going to start saying Abraham now. So I hope that doesn't confuse you. It gets too confusing to me to remember. It depends on what chapter I'm in, if it's Abram or Abraham. We all know him as Abraham. So if you see Abram in your Bible and I say Abraham, I'm just jumping ahead and making it simpler in my mind. He's Abraham. But what is very important, though, as far as details, verse 30. Sarai was barren. She had no child. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Sarai was barren. She had no child. That's how we're introduced to Abraham and Sarah. First thing he's going to be called to do is to leave his own country. Chapter 12 and verse 1, the Lord said to Abraham, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you." Why is that such a big ask? You got to think a little cultural context. Why is this a big ask? What's that? Big extended families. I mean, I don't want to go to a foreign country necessarily. That's just because I don't want to move. I don't want to be inconvenienced, but I think there's even more to it with Abraham. And the family is where we start, the larger family setup. Let's keep going with this. What about what was that? Safety. Yeah. It kind of harkens back to the Tower of Babel. We're safer if we stay together. Robert?
Well, if you know where Ur is, it's very fertile. It's where the two rivers are close together.
Not a bad place to be.
It's really good. So where are you sending me? Because this place is pretty awesome.
Yeah. I don't want to move because, for one, I moved to Texas a couple of years ago, and They made fun of In-N-Out, and they ate at this place called Whataburger. It was disgusting. So and that's even in America still, but just that change from the West Coast to Texas was weird. They did things different out there. They had different words. I got to admit, y'all is very useful, and I definitely just utilize that word in my own vocabulary, but I don't want to move because it's inconvenient, it's a hassle, and sometimes it's kind of strange where you go, and maybe I like where I'm living. But there's even more to it. Let's go with this idea of family and security. What kind of security? Just the support of family, but go even further than that. He was the firstborn. So he was the one that would inherit. His brothers would get an inheritance, but he would retain the family property. That was the security that he was leaving behind. I think that's the main idea of why this was such a big ask. I'm asking you to leave behind your security, your financial security, your comfort. You're going to do something that's not just inconvenient, which it is, and it's not just going to a strange place where you don't exactly know the customs or culture, but I'm asking you to leave behind your entire future. That's what's being asked of Abraham in this chapter. But here are the promises that God makes. I'll make you a great nation. I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That becomes the main promise of the Bible. If we suggested that the serpent and Eve, the descendants of the serpent, the descendants of Eve, this quarrel that would culminate in the seed of the woman stomping on the head of the serpent, if we suggested that that is the first preaching of the gospel in its most basic form, this is the most definitively conclusive beginning point of the messianic promise. And like I said, it's like you're looking in binoculars. You see something off in the distance, but it's blurry, so you start turning the dial, and it comes into focus. The closer you get to the New Testament, the more clear the picture is going to become of how God is going to bless the whole earth, how God is going to reverse this curse that came upon mankind, that is sin. And now we begin to understand with a little more clarity through Abraham. We went through all the descendants. Everyone in this world came from Noah, from one of his 3 sons. But now we trace it through this man, Abraham. We can be a little more specific now. And by the end of Genesis chapter 49, we'll trace it through the tribe of Judah, getting even more specific. So as we work our way through the New Testament, we are getting a clearer and clearer picture as to what is going on. In Abraham, the whole world would be blessed. So Abraham departs as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot goes with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Now keep in mind what we were just told about Sarah. She's barren, cannot have children. Abraham, I'm going to give you so many children you can't even count them. I'm going to make a great nation from you. How's that going to happen? And this is not going to be the only time we encounter a barren woman who has children. God is going to take the most unlikely path to accomplishing his goals so that no one can say it was coincidence or the work of man. At every turn, God is going to take the younger of the siblings and bless him. God is going to take the wife who is barren and bless her with the child that we are going to follow this promise through. God is going to take every unlikely turn. Basically, this story has more twists than an M. Night Shyamalan movie, right? He's going to take every unexpected turn. And this right here is the story. I will do this for you. I'll make you a great nation. I will bless you. But you're going to have to trust me. And you're going to have to walk away from what is right in your hands. What is a guaranteed, at least from a human perspective. You're going to have to walk by faith and not by sight. So let's read ahead for next week in Genesis chapter 12. Why does Abraham end up in Egypt? That's not where God told him to go. We'll come back to that next week. Thank you.